So, what is Sukuk? Sukuk is famously known as Islamic bonds which comply with the Sharia laws that focus on loaning money according to the guidelines which Allah has permitted. Sukuk involves a direct asset ownership interest that differs from the traditional Western bonds, or nowadays we call it as conventional bonds, which provides indirect interest-bearing debt obligation. So, according to the Islamic Financial Services Board (IFSB) in 2019, as cited in Ahmed ETAL 2020, asset in Sukuk may be in specific project or investment activity in accordance with Sharia rules and principles, which shows that assets that are used according to the Sukuk agreement are considered permissible and can work as an alternative or substitute to the conventional bonds. Do the conventional bonds condition that involve riba in its agreement and transaction, which is clearly despised and prohibited by Sharia law. Since any transaction that include riba actually exploit the clients who sign up for the bonds.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Suraya and I will present about overview of Sukuk in Malaysia. So according to the data retrieved from Securities Commission of Malaysia, Sukuk is preferred compared to the conventional bond with 65.4% market share in 2021. One of the reasons why Sukuk is preferred is because of Malaysia's government's incentive and support in promoting and increasing awareness among the investors. The incentives mentioned include tax deduction on expenditure or additional expenses incurred on the issuance of wakalah sukuk, exemption of stamp duty, tax exemption on profit and expenses incurred due to the asset disposal, tax exemption for expenses incurred on issuing Sri Sukuk, and exemption of income tax. Some of the popular contracts used in Sukuk market in Malaysia are Mudharabah Sukuk, Musyarakah Sukuk, Murabahah Sukuk, Ijarah Sukuk, and Wakalah Sukuk.
Next, I'll continue on the related trends and statistics in Malaysia. Firstly, the Islamic capital market statistic. The Islamic capital market is where individuals and institutions trade securities in the market that abide by the Sharia law. Day by day, the Islamic capital market is demanding rapidly due to some amazing benefits from the transaction. This can be proven by the current statistic of the total Islamic capital market in Malaysia. Based on the graph below, the size of the Islamic capital market is increasing over the years. When this happens, it affects the economic growth of the country, which is Malaysia. This is the total Islamic capital market, not specifically the Sukuk market. Next, the current statistic on the bonds and Sukuk market in Malaysia. Islamic bond, which is Sukuk, is part of the Islamic capital market in Malaysia. Sukuk in Malaysia has also shown good trends over the years. Based on the graph and extracted data of bond and Sukuk in Malaysia, the trend shows positive trends. This trend is a good trend because in the long term, it shows the amount of outstanding balance is increasing over the years. Next, the data below shows the current amount of corporate sukuk in Malaysia. This data is being narrowed down from the previous graph to illustrate in detail the exact amount of the sukuk market in Malaysia. As we can see, in late 2019, the outstanding balance is 555.5 billion in the corporate sukuk market. Later, the amount of the outstanding balance increased to 593.43 billion, approximately the amount of 37.93 billion of increment in the outstanding balance really affects the current economic situation in Malaysia. Imagine how many small firms can start a business if the average of this amount increased by years. The current outstanding balance is at 636.39 billion in late April 2022. To conclude, all the statistics shows positive trends related to the sukuk activities. For the Islamic capital market, the increasing trends shows that the Islamic capital market is doing good in Malaysia. Next, based on the statistic of bonds and sukuk, the amount of the outstanding keep increasing even though the amount of the new issuance and the redemption amount is quite unstable. Lastly, based on the data of Malay Sukuk corporate market, the amount of corporate Sukuk really gives a huge percentage of the total amount of bonds in Malaysia.
The impact of Sukuk on the banking sector can be seen from the recent events everyone has to deal with. For example, COVID-19 pandemic, which has severely affected all people all around the world as well as the economic sector. The banking sector are also no exception, as neither Islamic banks nor conventional banks are permitted from the disaster. For instance, banks that are affected in Malaysia may be Berhad, CIMB Bank, and Bank Muamalat. This is due to the fact that most individuals are not able to continue working normally due to the movement restrictions imposed by the government that later slow down their efficiency in paying loans, and they thought to keep applying for more loans along with the government decision on every bank in Malaysia has to provide moratorium, which makes it harder for the banking sector to keep its ground. However, researchers and economists agree that the only way for the banks to improve and to get away from the slump is by having income diversification, since it will help the banks to reduce risk and stabilize profit. So, according to the Lee ETL 2021, highlighted that additionally, only income diversification may alleviate the negative effect of the COVID-19 shock on the profitability of the Islamic banking system, especially the Sukuk investment. In a normal situation that is different from the COVID-19 pandemic, the evidence on how Sukuk affects the banking sector is limited. According to Minoni ETL 2019, it is only known that the Sukuk development impacted the performance of Islamic banks, while the conventional banks remains unaffected. However, in Malaysia, Sukuk surprisingly has outshined conventional bonds, which actually affected the conventional banks. So, according to Hashim 2018, Sukuk has been in hard demand by investors for years. The numbers of issuance of Sukuk are rising, and this actually leaves an impact on the conventional banks in Malaysia, as the bonds offered have higher interest rate and shows that investors have to pay more compared to the no interest rate from Sukuk. This, it is agreeable that Malaysian Sukuk is growing rapidly and can be another choice and needed to be focused by the investors instead of traditional Western bonds.
Sukuk has its own challenges in order to be implemented in certain places. This is due to the Sharia law that seeks the Muslims to do what is obligatory and avoid the forbidden things. Due to some restriction and other factors, there are some challenges in the Sukuk growth. The first challenge is the regulatory framework of the Sukuk. In the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) countries, the regulatory framework is not developed yet. The huge amount for finance and the growing popularity of the Islamic bonds as many streams plus the fake income issuer and the investors from Asia forced the country to establish its own regulatory framework. Next, the small percentage of socially responsible investment (SRI). SRI is also known as Green Sukuk. The SRI is more attainable and profitable than ever as it has a big percentage. As we know, the Green Sukuk is an innovative channel to address global funding gaps in green financing. The Green Sukuk can help in achieving high in SRI. The challenges that arise may be the reason for the new things to the market. Lastly, the complexity of the Sukuk structure. The complexity is in the form of products, transaction, usage of the funds, and many more. Due to some restriction by the law of Sharia, this becomes complex when it relates to the international trade. The non-Muslim has no obligation to follow the Sharia law. Thus, it is sometimes problematic when trading in the same transaction. The complexity discourages people to enter the Sukuk market. all the challenges can be solved today or in the future. It is because today's life has too many developed ways to react when some problem or challenges arise.
Lastly, sustainable and responsible investment of Sukuk in Malaysia. So the Securities Commission introduced the Sustainable and Responsible Investment Sukuk Framework in 2014, which is in line with the international standard. SRI Sukuk aim to facilitate financing needs for projects that are in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. SRI Sukuk in Malaysia can be divided into three categories, which are Green Sukuk, Social Sukuk, as well as Wakaf Sukuk. For Green Sukuk, the projects that are eligible includes those projects related to the renewable energy, energy efficiency, pollution prevention and control, sustainable water and water waste management, and more. Malaysia is the first issuer of Green Sukuk in the world, amounting to 250 million ringgit in 2017. All of the funds collected will be used solely for the purpose of financing the green projects, which will instill confidence in the investors. Next, Social Sukuk. Projects that fall under this category includes all projects related to affordable basic infrastructure, access to essential services, affordable housing, employment generation, food security, and socio-economic advancement and empowerment. The first social sukuk issued in Malaysia was in 2014, whereby Khazanah Malaysia Berhad issued the proceeds of 1 billion ringgit for education purposes. And lastly, Wakaf Sukuk, which include all projects related to the development of Wakaf properties or assets. In 2020, Securities Commission of Malaysia commenced a new framework, that is Wakaf Featured Fund Framework, to facilitate the offering of Islamic funds with Wakaf features to enable the growth of the Islamic social segment. And according to Capital Market, as of December 2020, Malaysia has issued 11 SRI Sukuk that amounted to 5.02 billion ringgit, and as of November 2021, Malaysia is the leading issuer of SRI Sukuk among the Asian 6 countries.
So, sukuk activities are actually one of the reasons that lead to the growth of the Malaysian economy, which has proven that there is a positive relationship between the issuance of sukuk and the gross domestic product. Because the gross domestic product is used as a measure of the well-being of the economy in Malaysia. So, according to the Silent ETAL 2016, the growth of sukuk, due to its transparency in transactions, has indirectly built trust and confidence for the investors or issuers to demand sukuk as an alternative to the conventional ones. This is due to the reasons that sukuk guarantee and offers some undeniably effective asset allocation mechanism, various types of sukuks that can be bought, and also maintain a crucial cash management tool for investors when they are interested in using sukuk as a tool to finance major development projects, for instance, infrastructure works, road networks, hospitals, etc. So, according to the statistic mentioned in the previous presentation, proven that Malaysia is identified as a country that is competent in providing profitable investments chances and able to have positive economic growth while adhering to and following the Sharia law.
To conclude, based on the data and analysis presented, the Sukuk market is one of the prominent markets in Malaysia since its existence, as its growth affects not only the Islamic capital market but also Malaysia's overall economic growth. Due to this growth, Malaysia is known as one of the prime issuer of Sukuk. And lastly, the growth of the Sukuk market can be acknowledged to be on par with the growth of the conventional bonds, both locally and internationally, as it provides higher security as well as profitability in the long run.